My name is Adrienne Lim, and I'm Dean of the Libraries. I'd like to welcome you to OU Libraries panel discussion today, held as part of our campus's African American Celebration series of events. Our discussion is entitled, My Family, My Community, Ujima, Where is Michigan Now in Social Justice Terms, and How Can We Reboot and Succeed? A question which I'm sure you'll agree is very timely and relevant. Especially in this particular social, economic, and political moment in our community. To address this important question, we are very fortunate to have with us today a distinguished panel of guest speakers, all of whom have unique perspectives and wisdom to share with us. It is my pleasure, however, to introduce our moderator for the discussion, who will then introduce our speakers. Our moderator is Dr. James Perkinson. Dr. Perkinson is a longtime activist and educator from inner city Detroit, currently teaching as professor of social ethics at the Ecumenical Theological Seminary and lecturing in intercultural communication studies at the University of Oakland, Michigan. Oakland University. He holds a PhD in theology, history of religions from the University of Chicago, is the author of Shamanism, Racism, and Hip-Hop Culture, Essays on White Supremacy and Black Subversion, and White Theology, Outing Supremacy and Modernity, and has written extensively in both academic and popular journals on questions of race, class, colonialism, in connection with religion and urban culture. He is in demand as a speaker on a wide variety of topics related to his interests and is a recognized artist on the spoken word poetry scene in the inner city. Dr. Perkinson will be introducing our topic and our speakers, so please help me welcome him to the podium.
Thank you much. And thanks to Oakland University Libraries for hosting this event as part of the African American Celebration Month. The format we will follow is one where, after the introduction of the panelists, I will take a moment to introduce and frame the topic. Each of the panelists will then have 5 minutes to have their say in response to the topic, and then it will be an open forum for you to engage, particularly with the panelists. We don't want to just be talking heads up here, but to have this be a dialogue. So as you're listening, be thinking about how you want to engage. And I'm going to introduce all the panelists up front. Immediately on my left is the Reverend Mikhail Kuro, who is a husband and father of 2 children, executive director of the Interfaith Center for Racial Justice, a not-for-profit organization in Macomb County, working to initiate relationships and build bridges of understanding among people of different cultures and faith traditions. Mikhail is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. Prior to joining the ICRJ, his organization now, in August 2006, he served 2 congregations in Macomb County. Before this, he worked as a congregational-based community organizer in Cook County, Illinois, and Washtenaw County, Michigan. Mikhail has a Master of Divinity degree from the Methodist Theological School in Ohio, in conjunction with Ecumenical Theological Seminary in Detroit, where I teach, a Master of Urban Planning and Bachelor degree in Political Science from the University of Michigan, where he was an Evans Scholar. Immediately to his left, Sharon Shea Howell, who has been a Detroit activist for more than 3 decades. She works with youth, artists, and community-based development. She lectures on issues of social difference and peace and writes a weekly column for the Michigan Citizen. Her most recent work is on political ideology and community transformation. She's a co-founder of Detroit Summer and of the BCNCL. She is a professor of communication at Oakland University, where she has taught for 30 years. Over the last decade, she's been working with the Michigan Roundtable on school and community-based initiatives for community reconciliation. This work is informed by her activities with the Beloved Communities Initiative, formed to encourage spirit-rooted activism. And then finally on her left, we have Donald E. Schneider. He has a career spanning 3 decades in business and economic development, holding a Master of Public Administration degree from Central Michigan University. He served for 15 years as president and CEO of Paper Plaz Converting, a Tier 1 automotive supplier. He also owned and operated Papa John's franchises in the Ann Arbor area. He serves on several high-profile boards, including the Chicago Federal Reserve Advisory Board since 2006 and the Henry Ford Health System Board of Trustees of the Community Care Services Board. He has won many awards and honors, including most recently the U.S. Small Business Administration Michigan Minority Champion of the Year in 2012. Mr. Schneider was formerly the Senior Vice President for Urban Economic Development of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and he is the author of Beyond the Bling, Real Steps to Financial Success. All right, the topic, obviously the title, My Family, My Community, Ujima, Where is Michigan Now in Social Justice Terms, and How Can We Reboot and Succeed? The word that's probably least familiar among those for most of us is Ujima, which is part of Kwanzaa, an alternative holiday celebration for African American peoples created by Maulana Karenga in 1966 and 67. And Ujima is the fourth of the 7 principles that organize vision and life. And it is especially devoted to collective work effort directed to the common good, in which brothers and sisters' problems and concerns become our own. It implies an obligation not only to the present, but to the past and future. It anticipates that we all have a role to play in the local community, broader society, and indeed the world itself. And given that emphasis, I want to take just a moment, since we're focused especially on Michigan in this discussion, to frame that discussion in a larger reality. I trust the panelists will have something to say about success. I want to take a moment to set the context. We live now in a globalized world in which we are deeply interconnected with everybody else on the planet. None of us is any longer innocent of the life conditions, opportunities, and traumas of anybody else. We are all profoundly intertwined. But it's a world that is now in profound crisis. Oil is peaking, climate is changing, the planet is heating, species are being rendered extinct at the rate of 200 per day, population is overshooting, oceans acidifying, glaciers melting, and sea rising. I'm married to a Filipina who grew up in the islands just north of Manila, and as she now looks home, she looks with fear and trepidation because the future of many parts of her homeland are in jeopardy. We are drawing down the energy inheritance of the planet beyond what is sustainable, while we inhabit political systems almost completely controlled by corporate interest and short-term perspective and incapable of responding to the crises that are rolling in on us. What does that mean? I think it means that there's a profound need to alter the way in which we have long imagined the future. A songwriter named John Gorka has a song called "The Old Future Is Gone, Can't Get There From Here," which means we need to anticipate that our future is not simply going to be more of the same, but in trying to reimagine that future, we need to pay attention also to the past. And that past has, on the face of the planet for our species, had us coming through 3 revolutions: an agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, which introduced us to the possibility of beginning to hoard resources and use food as a weapon and create social inequalities for the first time, and begin extracting resources from the surface of the planet. The Industrial Revolution, the second revolution, pulling out coal, gas, and oil, ramped up that process of extraction to the point where we're now upending the planetary ecosystem. And thirdly, what communication scholar Robert Jensen calls the delusional revolution in the 1920s, when the public relations and advertising industries got hipped to the idea that you don't only put out information about your product, you use language and imagery to try to get inside the bodies of all of us as desiring machines and reinvent human beings effectively as adjuncts of corporations whose primary purpose on the face of the planet is to consume. And we've been living with that for almost 100 years now, and we now have a situation where we have banks too big to fail, and we have people too big to sit in airplane seats, and we have piles of stuff too big to contain in our garages. A crisis of obesity at every level of our society, based on the idea that our purpose is simply to grow. Given that scenario, and I guess I'm sort of the bad cop here, trust you all will be the good cops, what I think we need to do is learn to walk on two legs, one committed to doing what is in fact possible within the system as we have it, but another leg that is tracking a path into the future that is coming in upon us, which I think is going to radically alter our sense of globalization and mobilization, where we're going to have to relocalize, where we realize that a society where the average carrot travels 1,300 miles to get from point of growth to your dinner plate is basically insane on a planet of limited resources, yielding profits to middlemen and using energies that we no longer can anticipate will be there. We're going to have to get involved growing our own food, regathering our own community, creating our own entertainment, and taking care of each other in a radically local venue. So with that as introduction, I will now turn it over to our first panelist. Do we want to just go in the order in which you're seated?
Okay. Thank you. Yes. I'm too depressed to talk after that. No, I'm very hopeful. My organization that I direct in Macomb County, the Interfaith Center for Racial Justice, we just had our annual Martin Luther King celebration. And so we brought together again 1,000 folks to commemorate Dr. King and to recommit to building the beloved community. And I think that we have to spend our energy and our focus in the next few years, especially on education. That's when I think of what's going on in terms of social justice in Michigan. I'm disappointed that Governor Snyder recently gave his State of Michigan address, and the big story to come out of that was really two things. One, that he didn't mention anything about Detroit, which is the elephant in the room in Michigan, of course. And two, that he was basically talking about a tax by improving our infrastructure and our roads, something that's long overdue and everybody can commend. But what's been going on with the Snyder administration has been a kind of a lack of focus and resources in education, specifically our local public schools. And I think our future necessitates that we not only hold teachers accountable to testing scores and all of the arguments there, but we think about what's lost when we lose collective bargaining, what happens when the schools are not funded, what continues to happen where we've not figured out as a society how to help those that come from lower socioeconomic means, which often is people of color, and are able to raise them up through our educational system. You know, public education in America was always the great piece to our democracy. And I think that we not only need to be vigilant of reforms that are going on nationally and in our state, but we have to really mobilize ourselves to become involved and make sure that this transfer, you know, what happened has been a transfer of, unfortunately, tax revenue from one entity to help business. All out of this, you know, Dr. Perkinson talked about, you know, the consumerism that has been really the modus operandi of our last 100 years. Well, it still is. I mean, when you pass a right to work legislation in the middle of the night during a lame duck, you know, session of our, you know, legislature, what we've done is, you know, continue this kind of myth that it's all about economics, that, you know, that we can do something there. And so I hope that many of you that may be out there are at Oakland University's very well known for its educational program, and I hope that some of you are interested in education, if not in supporting our educational, both from the primary to post-secondary education.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Sure you don't want to move closer? Okay. I want to first thank the library for putting this on. I've remarked in my classes that our culture has the way of taking every holiday we can find and turning it into an opportunity for a barbecue, a football game, or a sales activity. Thus far, we have not done that with African American History Month or Women's History Month or Gay Liberation Day. Instead, we have managed to keep these as times to reflect. And I think that is very critical, and I'm very grateful to the library for providing a forum for reflection. And to begin that reflection, I want to go to the words of President Obama, not in his most recent public speeches of the inauguration, but the week before when he talked about the problem of gun violence. And I don't know how many people heard that speech. Anyone? It's a very, very fine speech. And he's talking about how societies will be judged by how responsibly we care for our children. And he says in the speech, it is our responsibility to care for them, to shield them from harm, to give them the tools they need to grow up and do everything that they are capable of doing, not just to pursue their own dreams, but to help build this country. Now, I invite you to think about what a subversive message that is, that the purpose of education of our children is not just personal success, but is building our country to make it better. And so I think when we look at family, we have to look at how are we doing for the children. And to invite you to the recent report this week out by Data Driven Detroit. We were talking about Kurt Metzger earlier today when we met for free coffee. And Kurt Metzger has published his second annual State of the Child in the City of Detroit. It's an important document for people to read, and I want to share with you some statistics. Children are now 27% of the population of Detroit. It's nearly 200,000 children under the age of 18. Nearly 60% of them are living in single-family households, and nearly 60% of them are living in poverty. And by poverty, we mean under $24,000 a year for over half the households in the city. And essentially what Metzger shows us is the younger you are, the poorer you are in Detroit. 2 minutes, okay, thank you. Don't worry. So our children are in great trouble. And when we look at that, it is tempting at universities to think, well, we could go fix them somehow through our education department. I want to invite you to think that maybe some of these children could fix us instead, and to think about what is happening with the poorest, youngest mothers in the city of Detroit at the Catherine Ferguson Academy. It is one of 2 schools in the country for pregnant and parenting teens. Catherine Ferguson, as a Detroit public school, graduates 97% of its teen mothers. 100% of them go on to college. This school with that record was one of the first schools that the new emergency manager decided to close. It was rescued by a charter school, which tomorrow will start leveling the ground and building an intentional community that will be wholly constructed by teen mothers and their babies. The Catherine Ferguson Academy will, over this next 2 years, build a new community by the hands of the young people who will live there. It will be based on principles of ecology, sustainability, energy that comes from the earth and the sun as opposed to the grid, a community that will be intergenerational, and most importantly, a community that will be safe for children. That, to me, is the kind of thinking that is going on throughout the city of Detroit, where families have been so removed from what we think of as the mainstream that they are actually creating a new river of change. So I hope we can talk about that a little later. Okay?
Good afternoon. I was jotting down some notes from my other 2 panelists. I approach it not from a academic, but really more from an economic standpoint. When I served the past 2 years at Economic Development Corporation, I was appointed by Governor Snyder and Mike Finney to do urban economic development in our cities like Detroit, Pontiac, Saginaw, and Flint. So I have a different take on it. And I know the governor has done certain things, but on the other side of economically, we focused on how do we provide innovation, how do we provide collaboration, how do we provide implementation, and how do we duplicate what we do so I can take it elsewhere. And this is the approach that we take. And most of the projects that I've done, just to give you an example, is responsible for bringing Whole Foods to Detroit down on Mack and John R. in the Wayne State area. Funded a lot of stuff in Midtown, downtown. And the reason I did those projects is we're trying to bring the city of Detroit back. But my focus was we have to focus on the ages of 18 to 35 individuals to come back to that area, which means we got to provide the right restaurants, the right entertainment to bring those folks back. They are going to be the catalyst to get the city moving. As long as the city of Detroit or any other city, Pontiac, if we don't have young people, the city cannot come back. And then you talk about the school system. We also have to provide good schools to have young people to stay in the city, to want to have children, to send them to the school that are within the urban core areas. So you have to remove the politics. You know, I don't get hung up in the politics does not generate the kind of stuff. People get off into politics on the vote and this and that. And I've had discussions with Jesse Jackson when he was in town because Detroit was going to do a urban financial manager person either here or in Pontiac. And I told him, I said, you're so concerned about the vote. Having a vote and no money means nothing. We can sit up all day and vote on we want to purchase that Mercedes-Benz. We can vote. So what? We don't have no money. What does it matter? If you look at South Africa, Nelson Mandela, that is totally run by Africans, black Africans. The towns are still in Soweto, shanty towns. Why? They have all the political power. They have no money. The white folks have the money and left. The same way in Detroit. We have political power in Detroit. We have no money because people aren't coming together and collaborating on making things happen. So in spite of the politics that's going on in the city of Detroit, which you read about, economic development is going on. Whole Foods is coming in town. Chrysler's moving in this building. Dan Gilbert's buying up downtown. Politics. We put our wrong energy and focus on the wrong thing. Because at the end of the day, it's got to be about economic growth. And I'll stop there. Okay. No, let's keep going. Because I got tons of stuff to talk about, so let's keep going.
All right, so it is now open for you all to step into the conversation.
Again, you have to provide the proper atmosphere to cultivate that. And what bothers me about the school system, be it in Detroit or being in the state, that our children do not have the freedom to pick what interests them to go to the right school or building location to get it done. The money does not follow the kid. That needs to be changed. Because the reason our school system has the problem it has in Detroit is people are stuck in neighborhoods and communities because they just can't afford to leave. And if the school is down the street and you know it is not functioning or at the level it needs to be, you're forced to send your kid there. So until some of that can be changed, where children have the freedom to go where their interests and their expertise can soar, you're always going to have a problem with sending the kid what's convenient enough, because I don't have transportation. There's going to be feeding my child is a problem, all those type of things. And then you're looking at the outside, the suburbanites or the folks that have money to come in and say, let's give it a hand. And we've done a very good job with our nonprofit organizations, be it NEI or Hudson Weber, the Knight Foundations. They've all been very good and are collaborating to provide those type of funds and that type of atmosphere you're talking about, where volunteers will come and help out our children. But the same day, when you're done helping out the children, where are they going back to? You've not improved that condition, and you've not improved the school that they're going to because they're locked in, but they don't have the way of getting anywhere else.
I might give a little different take on that. First, I want to applaud the notion of creating authentic relationships, particularly between the suburbs and the city. That's the work that Mikhail is doing so valiantly, and it's a critical need for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that it's not a need for, I think, is this notion that there is nothing but deficit in the city. And I want to, particularly around spoken word culture that Jim's a part of, you will find poetry performed in the city in ways that are earth-shattering and globally recognized. The Detroit Slam team is the best in the nation. So there is a verbal skill already emerging in the city, and you could be part of that. But I think the way to be part of it is to recognize there is already a talent there. There's a wonderful poet named Will Copeland who talks about the breath of life and how when the surrounding culture has taken away everything but your breath, the only thing you have are the words you can make. And that spirit infuses a spoken writing talent in the city that has a long history there. So I would invite you to explore some of that and say that you could go to the Allied Media Conference website, AMC 2013, and there are hundreds of opportunities to volunteer with spoken word and media artists that are emerging. So there's a lot of places to go, but I really want to invite us to think about one of the reasons to go there is because so much rich activity is emerging that will enlarge all of us.
Just to add what she said about, I don't know if you may realize this, but when you think of New York and Chicago, or the great theater districts and all the entertainment that they have, do you realize that once you add up all the seats in Detroit, be it the Fox Theater, the Fisher Theater, the Gym Theater, and the Music Hall. We have more theater seats than Chicago and New York put together. It's right down our city, and people don't realize that that asset is there.
And much of that is, many of those seats are filled to see locally written theater, certainly locally acted theater. So there's a vibrant culture that you could be part of.
We need to have the political courage to, there's where a vote matters, that how much money have we been spending on the wars that we've been engaged in? Think about how much money this country has before we start saying there is no money. It's a matter of priority. We've continued to say over and over again, children are a priority, children first. We've never done that politically, and until we do that, I don't see a way out.
Let me clarify. No, I didn't say we don't have. We have money. You just need to motivate the folks to spend the money if you're doing something that they're interested in putting their money in. We have money. I mean, it's been evident if you look at the M1 rail system that's going to happen. The foundations and Kresge came up with $41 million. Dan Gilbert is buying up most City Detroit along with Mike Ilitch. Oh, we got money. You just need to provide the right interest for them to invest the money in. And people look at our school system and they see where the school system is broken and you're not producing the right type of talent to come out of the schools. They are not motivated to put money into something like that. From an investment standpoint, economic standpoint, everybody likes to put money into something where they can see a return. They don't want to keep dumping money into just an open hole where there's not going to be a return. And as you mentioned, tons of money have been spent in our school system and we've not seen the return, come back. But if you take it to a higher level, even on the higher academic level of being Oakland University, Michigan, my concern is, from an economic standpoint, people talk about the mortgage problem that we've had. We're going to have a student loan problem. It's almost $1 trillion, and I'm concerned about kids being able to pay off that loan. If they're in the right curriculum, they get the right job, they can pay it back. Otherwise, people walk away from their homes every day. You can't walk away from the student loan. They're going to follow you until the ultimate end. So I think we need to be focused on where people should put their talents and energies, because 80% of people in this country are in jobs and professions that they do not like. And what is the outcome of that? High absenteeism, high tardiness. They don't want to be there. So you have to get folks, instead of looking at the dollar amount of what my major is going to pay me, I need to do something I'm going to like to do. And if I enjoy doing that and if the pay is low, then I should be willing to accept that outcome. But some of these curriculums, some of these majors are not going to get you to where you want to be financially. And again, to me, I bring it up at Chicago Federal Reserve meetings we have, what we can do about the $1 trillion student loan debt. How can we help these students out? How can we help alleviate some of the problems that they're going to face, that when they graduate, come out and get a job, they can't pay off the loan. So you're borrowing more than what you can really take on. So that's just my economic point.
One of the gifts of Detroit, I think, is that it tells us that industrial society is gone. The world is no longer moving toward the consolidation of mass production for mass consumption. And other places can avoid looking at that question, but you can't really avoid it in Detroit. As you go down the streets, you see that that way of life is gone. And so the question is, what will replace it? The unique thing about that question is that when people lived in the shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture, or from agriculture to industry, there wasn't really a mass consciousness that we were in the middle of a complete shift in how things were done. Now, there is a spreading mass consciousness. We're in a complete shift of how things were done. So we can't answer these problems with yesterday's solutions. They just compound the problem. That means we need new ways of approaching ideas like work and jobs. And you're right, about 80 to 90% of the people who have a job hate it. Those of us who teach or do what you do, we love what we do, but we are such a minority. So that how is it conceivable that we can create work that is life-sustaining, that is fun, and that people enjoy? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think if you visit what they're going to be doing at Catherine Ferguson, you will see young women using the highest levels of technology available. This sort of flexible fabrication machines, which mean essentially that within the next decade, people anywhere will be able to make anything, anytime, out of very little resources. It is a new mode of production made possible by computerization and miniaturization. And they're doing it at Catherine Ferguson, they're doing it in the Blanche Kelso Academies, and they're doing it right now in about 5 places around the country. In the next decade, work is something that could actually replace jobs, and we could be doing things we like to sustain ourselves. And I think that's emerging in Detroit right now.
The outcome I would like to see is, number one, you have to replace some things into the school so the person can feel that there's opportunity out there. Schools are not teaching anything about business. Schools aren't teaching anything about credit, being responsible. And I tell most audiences I talk to that when I was fortunate, when I was in 5th, 6th grade, my mother let me go to the mailbox and get the bills out. My mother let me sit down with her and showed me how to write a check to pay bills. So I knew what electric bill was. I knew what a water bill was at 5th grade. And I enjoyed it. I mean, little kid, I didn't know any better. I just enjoy going to the mailbox. I'm working with my mom and my dad doing this type of stuff. And it taught me as growing up to be really responsible about how you handle bills and how you look at things differently. And to this very day, I mean, I'm very odd, but if you give me $100 and I went to Jamaica and Bahamas and I came back with 97, I had a good time. I'm just not into spending money, but I'm just saying. But anyway, I think once we put that back into schools, even put just phys ed back in school so kids can have phys ed and be active and do those kind of things, I think you get the outcome of where you can direct where a child wants to be. I'm a single parent. I raised 2 children on my own, and also have a stepson. And it was hard. I mean, just in the city of Detroit, raising 2 children. And I worked low-paying jobs. Why did I work low-paying jobs? Because low-paying jobs to me did not mean I had to think. I was there in a physical matter to do what I need to do, but it provided me the opportunity to go to school, pick my kids up, be there for certain special events and what have you, and really not be missed. So I did that until they got to college. And after they got to college, then I started using my mind, and that's when I became an automotive supplier, and I started buying stuff and all this. But I took that period out to devote to them. I made a sacrifice as a single parent. And I think if you look at schools and the outcome of kids, you got to have the right parenting that's going to direct. Be a single parent. I'm a single, and I think I was able to raise my children successfully because I watched how my parents raised me. So I was able to do that the same thing. And I had a daughter and a son. My daughter was the oldest one. I was very proud of her. She graduated magna cum laude. She went to U of M. She went to U of D Mercy. She's a mechanical engineer by trade. A lot of money we pay for it now. All she wants to do is just be a house mother. I'm like, you got to be kidding. We spend all this money to go to school. But they just told me for my daughter, she went and got into engineering. Why? It was a big dollar amount at the end of the day, right? But that's not something she really wanted to do. I found it out way later after we spent, X amount of thousands for her to go to school to do that. So I'm saying just by observing that from firsthand, I understand where kids are today and what they need to be doing, which they can enjoy doing. Luckily, she landed on her feet, but most folks aren't landing. They're struggling. And like you said, you want to feel that you're participating, you want to bring value. And how do you know when you don't bring value to something? When you're not missed. If they can operate without you being there, you didn't bring any value.
I'd like to go on vacation with you. That's pretty good. I think that the question of education is really complicated. And public education in the United States is really a short experiment, about 100 years at the most on a mass scale. And the original justification was to do what they did for you, teach you how to fit into the industrial society. Well, it doesn't make any sense now because the industrial society's gone. So what is education for is the big question in front of all of us. Or, you spend all that money and it's not what you wanted at all. So what's it for? What's it about? And a way I think to help think about that is that industrial society wanted to control you. We needed people to know how to be on time, do what they're told. Today, we need everybody's creativity. It's not about control, it's about creativity. So how do we create a school system that fosters creativity? And we actually know some things about that. And one of the things we know is that if we engage the smallest of children in thinking about their community, as President Obama said, and how to solve those problems, they will do what you did. They'll figure out how to pay those bills. They'll figure out how to fix up the neighborhood. And I'm not just saying this out of the air. There's a wonderful book called Place-Based Education by Gregory Smith, which I hope we have in the library. It's a terrific account of how children in urban, rural, big city, and small towns use the disasters of their community as a curriculum to rebuild that community. There's a school starting in Detroit, the Boggs Educational Center, that will be rooted in place-based education. And Detroit Summer, a program that I'm intimately involved with, has this notion that young people can use and develop their creativity to solve community problems. So our outcome has to go back to what President Obama said. It's got to be not just so children can learn skills, but so they can become part of rebuilding a country that is desperate for their creativity.
Thinking is the key. We want thinkers. If you can think, you're probably guaranteed to get a job. But if you know why you're thinking, that person will probably be your boss. So you just have to gauge on how you think and how you approach stuff. And that's what it's about. It's about thinking. It's about coming up with innovative stuff to do. And for example, when I got my first contract at Chrysler, I was an automotive supplier. There's a plant called McGraw Glass, 1995, when I started my automotive business. McGraw Glass had 1,200 people work there, 3 shifts. I went there and I saw walking through the plant, how could I do something at this plant to make money? And I figured out they needed interleaver paper to fit in between the glass, protect the glass from cracking and breaking when they ship it to their assembly lines. I went back, submitted a proposal. I got the $1 million contract to do that. That's what it was. I built my business on that. I built a business from four employees to 100 employees. I had a plant in Detroit, one in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, one in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I thought, and I also wrote it in my book, that there are people work there for 20 to 25 years in that plant. I never worked in the automotive industry at all. But I just thought, what could I do? But what the thinking was, those people that came to work were clock watchers. When they got to work at 7 a.m., they wanted that break at 10. They wanted that lunch at 12. At 3 o'clock, they wanted to go home. Nobody thought about, how can I make money from this place without me being here? And here I just walked through, saw what needs to be done, made a proposal, went back, did it, built a business from 0 to $10 million over the 14 years I was an automotive supplier with 100 employees. So I know if you put me in a corner and you got the same talents, I can think of all kinds of stuff to do. But that's only part of it. You got to be able to implement what you thought. And I was willing to do that. If people can implement half the stuff they think about, they can be successful. I can go sit in the corner, come up with all kinds of business ideas, what a business card should look like, what my brochure will look like. I can just come up with all of that. But if I never implement it, nobody knows anything about it. So this is what our kids need to do today. Think. Why am I thinking? Can I be innovative? And will it make me money?
I'd like to add, just in answer to your question, that we create the outcome that they're lifelong learners, that their ability to learn and desire to learn never ends. And that's, we've kind of created the system of, just like in the automotive place he was talking about, where it's just to get it through. Instead, we need to instill the value in education, what it's, why that's so important, not just to get the job, but to make a career and a life for yourself, and et cetera. I also think it's very important. I'd like to ask you, in terms of your public, how much did you learn about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and their ideas, or was that not even a part of your education?
Black History Month
That was it?
and my own reading,
Mm-hmm.
and believe it or not, much of it within the last 5 or 6 years.
Okay. That's one of the things that our organization is trying to do, is we celebrate our signature event as the annual Martin Luther King celebration. And we recognize, the further and further we get away from the, civil rights era, how few people know what we're celebrating, and know the full context of who Dr. King and Malcolm X, what they had to say, and what is still relevant of what they had to say then, today, in trying to, lift that up. I just think that's fundamental, that we revamp our education, not just to think about test scores and outcome, that we create thinkers, as we've been talking about.
Well, the reason that you get locked into test scores, be it SAT, ACT, all that type of stuff, is because somebody figured out an idea on how to make money.
That's right.
It's a money generating thing. They figured out an idea. Okay, well, fine, we got this, and you're right. We got to get beyond that and let our own folks come up with the new ideas. That's what we're waiting for. Because when Jennifer Granholm was governor, she would go to China and Japan and tell everybody about Michigan. We were in the economic problems, that we had a skilled trade base. Please utilize us. And I told her in the meeting, I said, taunting the skilled trades, you're sending the wrong message. You're telling people in China and Japan that we know how to follow instructions, we know how to do step A, B, and C, but we're not thinkers of ourselves. We're not innovators. We are listening to you give me a menu or whatever, I can go do it. So saying that you got a skilled trade base of workers, you're not putting out the right message. You're not saying we're innovative, we're thinkers. We're not saying we can compete with Seattle or Silicon Valley. You're talking about we can pick up and build things, because somebody told us how to do that.
There is a narrative about Detroit that I just heard again today, this morning, coming in, that essentially says the city was terrific, then there were the riots, then everything went downhill. Right? And the sort of villain in that narrative always turns out to be the people of the city of Detroit. And I want us to think that maybe the intensity of the urban uprising has overshadowed our ability to think about what has really happened. Because long before the rebellion, Detroit was losing population. Beginning in 1950, we'd peaked. So almost 2 decades before the rebellion, people were moving out for the same reason that they are moving out today. Work is gone, schools are underfunded, public resources are underfunded. So there is a different way to think about what's been happening in Detroit, and part of it is the complete and in some cases intentional withdrawal of resources from the city. And I could give you a long list of those if you like. Meanwhile, without a single piece of legislation to support it, Detroit is now the leader of the urban agricultural movement globally. In 20 years, we've gone from about 100 urban gardens to about 2,000. MSU, Michigan State University, recently published a study that says, given the current level of gardening, Detroit could produce 75% of all of the vegetables it consumes inside the city. That's an astonishing shift in how food is produced and consumed. And I think it's trying to understand that there has been a lot going on in Detroit that doesn't look like the cities of the past. Because in fact, the city that's emerging is a very different kind of city. It will be, for the first time in 500 years, a city that shatters the urban-rural divide. And that's something very new. It will look different, it will feel different, and I think the choices about how we support that or not are right now on the table for us. So I think it's critical that we take a look at what are we expecting the city to become, and where are we looking for people to be rebuilding it.
And to just add to that, I would say in the past, going in 3 years, you've had more collaborations with the foundations, be it the Huston Weber, the Knight Foundation, the NEI Foundation, the Community Service Foundations. Somehow we've been able to really bring them together, and they see the jewels that are here, and they're making their own investments. So private and non-private organizations are coming together to make this thing happen. I mean, I've seen millions of dollars are being spent. I mean, the Illages are spending a lot of money, and also there's going to be a lot of state money thrown in a pot for what they want to build, an entertainment center down in their Masonic Temple in that area. So they know that this is coming back. But what is real interesting is that at the end of the day, when you look at a city like Detroit and you look at a Dan Gilbert or the Illages, they might have spent maybe $1 billion just to buy a city in this country. And they're buying up Detroit for probably at the cost of $1 billion. You can't go buy another city for $1 billion. You can't buy New York or Chicago or St. Louis and go on and on. But they're buying up Detroit because even though that old saying, somebody else's junk, somebody else's treasure, these guys see treasure in Detroit, and they're making it happen in the buildings that they're buying, the money they're spending, the businesses. They are bringing businesses here as well. They are bringing the IT stuff in, and they're also trying to provide jobs. At the end of the day, it's about jobs. And that's why we spent a lot of money on bringing Whole Foods here. We spent money on 8 Mile and Woodward, on the Myers store that's coming in there at the old state fairgrounds. The reason we spent that money as a state is because at the end of the day, it's about jobs. So 8 Mile and Woodward is supposed to produce 1,200 jobs. The Whole Foods supposed to produce 80 jobs. Avalon Bakery was one of my pet projects down at Wayne State. At the end of the day, they're going to produce 60 jobs. So we have spent a lot of money based upon the jobs that these businesses are going to bring in. So there's a lot of activity going on. Pretty soon you get a chance to see more of it. There's always articles, and maybe they don't advertise like they should, but there's tons of money. That's why I told you. There is no shortage of money. There's tons of money being spent. You just need to be on the right end of the receiver part to get some of that money.
Okay, we've got to end it there. There obviously have been a number of different kinds of proposals and visions put out, and I think that is going to be the near term of our work, is to sort through those. I want to thank all of our panelists, thank you all for being part of this discussion, and thank the library.
Thank you.